On a very important term called sustainability. And it's a term that deals with obviously human geography, science. The lesson today, as I was looking through it, really shows you the complexity and the variety that we have in our class of human geography. Now, sustainability, as you're looking at those images, you pretty much have a good idea about what we're going to be talking about. So we're actually going to mix our human geography class with a lot of science today. Sustainability is a very simple concept to understand. It's the use of the Earth's resources in ways that ensure their availability in the future. It's a relationship between human beings and the environment, all right? Providing that we take care of it. In some cases, we don't. But it allows for the availability of resources, not just today, but a very important message in that definition is in the future. The first place that we start in our lesson on sustainability is we talk about resources on Earth. The definition of a resource is very simple. It's a substance in the environment that is useful to people. And as you're brainstorming in your own mind right now, you can come up with all kinds of different types of resources. Well, those types of resources that you're brainstorming in your mind right now can be categorized into two different types. First off, we have renewable resources. Renewable resources are produced in nature faster than humans can consume them. They are in abundance. What's an example of a renewable resource? Well, it's air, soil, water on Earth. Those things are produced faster in nature than humans can consume them. Now, how do humans affect renewable resources? That's a question that we have to answer today. Well, humans can never deplete the amount of air we have, soil and water, but we can help to destroy it through air pollution, through erosion, and so on, okay? So the first type of resource is a renewable one. And remember the examples, air, soil, and water. We can't deplete them, but we certainly can help to destroy them through pollution and so on. The second type of resource is a non-renewable resource. A non-renewable resource is one found in nature that is produced slower than it is consumed. A non-renewable resource is not in as much abundance as a renewable resource. What would be an example of a non-renewable resource that is produced in nature slower than consumed, okay? Well, non-renewable resources are items like coal, petrol, oil, natural gas, those types of things that are produced in nature slower than they are consumed. Well, let's answer this question. How do humans affect non-renewable resources? Well, we can't ever destroy them, all right? But we can deplete them. We can deplete them. We can use it up, so to speak, okay? And those are the two differences of how humans affect renewable and non-renewable resources. So once we have our lesson on resources out of the way, now we can get into sustainability. Now, sustainability is famous for having three pillars. It talks about three different topics within the topic of sustainability. Those three pillars are called the environmental pillar, the social pillar, and the economic pillar. These three pillars were named by the United Nations, okay? This is a really big deal when people started to think about the future and the environment and so on. Now, the pillars are shown here in this diagram, and you can see how all three of these tend to work together to achieve sustainability on Earth. You can see the examples of the environmental pillar there. You can see examples of the economic pillar there, and you can see examples of the social pillar, which we'll talk about specifically today, all three of them. Now, one thing that I want to do is I want you to pause the note session when I get done talking here in a second, and I want you to Google search something called Our Common Future. Our Common Future. It was a 1987 UN report that recognized sustainability, recognized the importance of it. It recognized a combination of the natural elements on Earth as they relate to the human elements on Earth, how nature and how humans interact. At this point, I want you to pause your notes for a second. I want you to stop it. I want you to Google search Our Common Future from 1987. When you click on the actual document, there's a million gazillion pages I want you to simply just scroll down for a second, for about a minute, and just look and see what it's all about. And you're going to see a lot of stuff dealing with the environment and the human interaction with the environment and so on. All right, so take 1 second, hit pause, and go check out Our Common Future for about a minute or two. Okay, now that you're back, in this document, it's basically everything is outlined in something called the Brundtland Report. Now, Mr. Brundtland was a prime minister of Norway, and he basically came up with this idea of sustainability and came up with these 3 pillars. Now, what these 3 pillars do and what is outlined in this report is that simply they wanted to promote environmental protection while at the same time maintaining economic growth and social equity. So we're talking about how people can gain economically and socially by using the environment, trying to sustain the environment and not harming the environment while at the same time promoting economic growth and social equity is the goal of sustainability's 3 pillars. Now, let's talk a little bit more here. Let's look at the environmental pillar real quick, okay? One thing that we have to look at in the environmental pillar is the difference between conservation and preservation. Those are 2 words that you definitely have heard of before, but they're different. Let's highlight those differences. First off, conservation is the use and management of resources to meet human needs. Conservationists look at renewable resources, all right, and they see how fast or how slow they are processed in order to meet human needs. They look at cows, they look at trees, they look at the non-renewable resources as well, and they use and manage these resources to meet human needs, to ensure that humans have what they need. That's what conservationists do. They look at cows, they look at farm animals, they look at the trees, they look at how rapid we are consuming these to meet our human needs, okay? Preservationists are a little bit different. Preservationists maintain resources in their present condition and don't talk about and don't think about resources like cows and trees and non-renewable resources like coal and oil and natural gas in order to meet human needs. All right, here's a pretty cool quote that helps you to understand the difference. Preservationists say basically, forget human needs, okay? Plants and animals have a natural right on Earth to absolutely exist without thinking about how they can be used by humans, okay? And that's a very important lesson between the difference between conservationists and preservationists. Now, the social pillar has to do with something that's pretty simple. It's pretty easy to understand, and it has to do with what humans need on Earth, okay? So all humans need shelter, all humans need clothes, all humans need food on Earth, okay? So how do we support sustainability to meet human needs? How do humans make choices to support sustainability while still maintaining the need to have food, shelter, and clothes, all right? Well, people make decisions. People make choices to support sustainability and so on, okay? Here's an example. Over to the right is the Miami Football Hurricanes, my team, my college team. And 2 years ago when they opened up against LSU in Dallas, Texas, they wore a certain uniform. And Adidas made the uniforms that you're seeing on the screen out of recycled plastics from the ocean, okay? So instead of basically using a normal cotton or normal polyester, normal whatever it is, they chose to use recycled plastics from the ocean, literally, to make these uniforms, okay? And if you're interested in that, Google that because it talks about it and it's really cool about how they did this, okay? But it's a really good example of how consumers make choices to support sustainability to meet the need to have clothes, to have food, to have shelter, and so on. Now, probably the toughest one to understand is the economic pillar of sustainability. This is where resources are exchanged in a marketplace for a price, okay? So at what price or at what value do we harm the environment to make money? That's basically what this is all about. And you can see that there's probably clashes between the economic pillar and the environmental pillar as we're going to talk about. So the environmentalists absolutely are very, very critical of this pillar of sustainability, okay? Some will argue, is there a limit to Earth's resources? Is there a limit to the amount of Earth's resources that we have here? And it's an argument that environmentalists have and the ones that are in support of the economic pillar. Now, a great example of the economic pillar I can give you is right here, right to the west of us here in the Everglades, okay? So the Everglades is a national park, and obviously it's an environmental treasure, an absolute treasure, okay? Well, where does the economic pillar come into play in the Everglades? Well, let me tell you something. If you guys have ever been on an airboat ride, or if you've ever been out to the Everglades and so on, that business is making business off of the Everglades. Are those airboats, are those boats or ships that you're going fishing on harming the environment? Harming the environment? Is it helping the sustainability of the ecosystem that we have in the Everglades, okay? So that is an example of where an environmentalist would have a problem maybe with the businesses that are leaking gas or leaking fuel or causing air pollution by using those airboats out in the Everglades. So that's a pretty good example for you guys to understand this a little bit better and how they all work together. Now, let's talk about sustainability and Earth systems. We're going to go into a little bit of science here for you science folks in the crowd and look at the systems on Earth and how it affects human beings, how it allows for us to be what we call sustainable, which is the theme for the day. Well, natural resources are part of 4 physical systems on Earth. 4 physical systems, okay? Now, these 4 systems are basically categorized into something called a biotic system or an abiotic system. Now, abiotic systems basically are composed of non-living things. This is part of the 4 physical systems we'll mention here in a second on Earth, okay? So the biotic systems are where living things can live on Earth. Now, of the 4 systems, there's only one of these systems where living things live, all right, or are what we call biotic. Now, the first system that we're talking about is the atmosphere, okay? It's the first physical system that we have here on Earth. Now, the atmosphere basically are thin layers of gases that surround Earth, all right? As we're going to talk about, it affects climate and so on, and it is basically considered to be abiotic. There are no living things or organisms that live there, okay? Now, the second one is the hydrosphere. Now, the hydrosphere is the area on Earth, or the physical system on Earth, where all water is on or near the Earth's surface, okay? All water that is on or near the Earth's surface. So that's precipitation and different things like that. Now, the lithosphere is basically the Earth's crust and part of the upper mantle. This system is responsible for the creation of our mountains. This system is responsible for our physical features, our geographic features that we have here on Earth and so on. The fourth one is the only biotic system that we have on Earth, and you'll remember that because it is called the biosphere. That's basically here on the Earth's surface where all living things live on Earth. Now, the great thing about these 4 physical systems is that they all affect the distribution of people on Earth, okay? This is where the systems affect human geography. And we'll talk about that in the next slide when we get to later on when we talk about ecosystems and how these 4 physical systems definitely 100% affect that, okay? So the Earth's physical systems, all 4 of them definitely affect sustainability on Earth, and obviously human geographers are very interested in studying these 4 physical systems. Now, speaking of ecology and speaking of the biosphere, let's answer that question right now. So why do human geographers care about these systems? Why do human geographers care about these ecosystems? Well, basically, humans here on Earth have to breathe. Humans have to breathe, okay? Now, the atmosphere, which we mentioned earlier, basically gives gases, all right? It's a thin layer of gases that surrounds Earth, and it basically allows for humans to breathe. How do we affect it? Well, pollutants affect it, obviously. Definitely oxygen can be affected in that way, but it's very important that human geographers learn about the atmosphere because that produces everything that we need to breathe, okay? Now, without water, it's very simple. Humans die. So human geographers are very, very interested in the hydrosphere. The liquids that are formed in oceans, lakes, rivers, and things like that obviously play a huge role. And that's why human geographers would be very interested in what we call the hydrosphere. Now, humans need materials and fuel to live on Earth. So human geographers are going to study the lithosphere. They are going to study, the surface, the features, the landforms, why it's flat, why it's mountainous, where we can find our materials in order to build, in order to move things, basically, okay? So that's why human geographers would be very interested in the lithosphere. And very simple, humans need food. Humans need food. So that's why human geographers would be very, very interested in, obviously, the biosphere and how that works. Well, here's an example. What's an example of how humans can affect, all right, how human actions are sustainable and can be sustainable, but also, on the flip side, how humans can affect the ecosystem, how humans can affect the biosphere here on Earth and the Earth's surface? Well, farmers are a big culprit of this. Farmers definitely affect the biosphere, the Earth's surface, positively and negatively. One way that farmers affect the biosphere negatively is sometimes farmers tend to build on slopes. Sometimes farmers tend to build, and plow less. They plant different types of crops where the roots affect the soil and so on. Farmers can stop this concept of erosion by building on flat surfaces, planting on flat surfaces, and so on, okay? So I know we're calling out the farmers, the background of our society today, but they can definitely help. Now, another example of a way that humans can affect the biosphere has to do with farmers as well, okay? Soil obviously contains tons of nutrients that we need in order to produce plants, okay? If farmers are not rotating their crops properly, well then obviously there's going to be a depletion of nutrients in that soil, and if they don't grow, we don't eat, okay? So these are just two good examples of how humans can definitely affect the biosphere, obviously, and then in turn, that affects sustainability, obviously, which is the theme of the day. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about today is cultural ecology. And it's a very simple study that many people starting in the 1700s started to talk about. It's the relationship between humans and the environment. In fact, cultural ecology probably has been one of the other themes of our lesson so far, because we've talked about many times how humans affect the environment and vice versa. These cultural ecologists that first came up with this concept made a very central statement that the physical environment causes social development. The physical environment causes social development. Well, the big boy and the big girl term for that is environmental determinism. Our physical environment determines our decisions on Earth, okay? One very good example of that is climate and where people live, okay? Climate is broken into 5 different regions on Earth. It was actually created by a German climatologist. There's 5 different types of climate regions on Earth. There are tropical climates, there are dry climates, there are warm mid-latitude, which you should know, climates, there are cold mid-latitude climates, and there are polar climates. Now, climates affect the distribution of people and where they live on Earth. So climate was a major determination of civilizations being created from the start, okay? So this is a very big deal, but it was first brought about and written about in the 1700s on Earth, okay? People started talking about these things. These were early human geographers, basically, okay? And they didn't even know it. Now, one very important term that we have to understand to finish up our lesson for today is possibilism. It's a term that is associated with cultural ecology. Now, possibilism is very easy to understand because the word possible is almost on there, and this is the definition. Possibilism is basically where our physical environment limits some of our actions, but we can adjust to the environment. See what I did there? It's possible. Let me give you an example. Wheat is a crop that does not need a lot of water to grow on Earth. That's why wheat, and farmers decided to make an adjustment. Wheat was found first in drier climates in Southwest Asia. Wheat is a very easy crop to grow. It does not need a lot of water. So some farmers, because of the environment, have to grow wheat instead of some other crops. Now, rice, for you farmers in the crowd, needs a lot of water. So the climate in East Asia, in China, where it rains a lot, in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, that area of the world, rice is cultivated tremendously there because they have a lot of rain. You can't produce rice in places where it's cold. You can't produce rice in places where there's not a lot of rain. Corn is another one, okay? You don't hear about corn being grown anywhere in the world except for here in the Americas, okay? And that's why it was first grown here, okay? So farmers, because of the physical environment, are limited on what they can grow. But it is possible for them to grow other crops that is conducive to their physical environment, okay? And that's a good example of possibilism, which in turn is a very good example of cultural ecology.